Senator, welcome and thank you for coming today. Why don't you start out with giving us a little bit of your opening arguments and thoughts about the labor movement, where we stand today, and where you think it needs to go, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about my history with working people, and as someone who came from a working class family that lived paycheck to paycheck. And I'm not going to talk about the fact that over many decades I have a 100% voting record for the AFL-CIO. And I'm not going to talk much about the fact that over my political career I've been on the picket lines more times than I can remember. And that in the last couple of years I work with the workers at Amazon and Disney who are being paid starvation wages and got them at least $15 an hour. And I'm not going to be talking much about the fact that unlike some of the folks running for president, I did not vote for the war in Iraq. I did not vote for the Wall Street bailout. I did not vote for a terrible bankruptcy bill. And maybe most important, I did not vote for the disastrous trade policies like NAFTA and PNTR with China, which have cost us over 4 million jobs. I led the opposition to those trade agreements. But I'm not going to talk about the past. I'm going to talk about the future. And what the future is about is that Congress has got to pass my legislation to raise the minimum wage in this country to $15 an hour. We need to make public colleges and universities and trade schools tuition free. We need to cancel all student debt in this country. And we do that through a tax on Wall Street speculation. This country and the Congress, against my vote, voted to bail out the crooks on Wall Street. Now it is their time to help the working class of this country. When we talk about the future, we are talking about creating millions of good-paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. We are talking about transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy so that we can save the planet. And we are talking about doing what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a human right through a Medicare for all single-payer program. I don't have to tell anybody here that over the last 45 years, the corporate elite, through their greed and corruption, has been waging a war against the working class of this country. Today, the average American worker in inflation accounted for dollars, despite a huge increase in productivity and technology, that worker is not making 1 penny more than he or she did 45 years ago. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. Bottom half of America has actually seen a decline in their wealth. Today you got 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. And while half of the country is working paycheck to paycheck, 49% of all new income goes to the top 1%. What my campaign is about and what my presidency will be about is bringing working people together, black and white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, to create an agenda that works for all of us and not just the 1%. Together, we are going to end a corrupt political system which allows billionaires to buy elections. Together, we are going to create an economy that works for all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. And when we talk about creating an unprecedented grassroots movement to take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite, we are talking about implementing my legislation, the Workplace Democracy Act, which is the most progressive pro-labor legislation ever introduced in recent history. And what that legislation says, that if 50% of the workers in a bargaining unit plus one sign a card saying they want a union, they will have a union. And what that legislation says, that if a company refuses to negotiate a first contract, that company will be severely penalized. What this legislation does is end Section 14B of Taft-Hartley and eliminate all right-to-work legislation in this country. What this legislation does is end the exploitation of so-called independent contractors. What this legislation does is end the lies which make workers into quote-unquote supervisors so they don't get overtime. So what we are talking about, brothers and sisters, is creating a government of the working class in this country, by the working class in this country, and for the working class in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Glad to see you have your voice back. We saw you in the debate last week sort of struggling there, and I understand you took the weekend off from campaigning to... 1 day anyhow. 1 day, okay, that's not the whole weekend. Let me ask you this. The green energy concept, things like that, green energy jobs. What is your viewpoint on that, sir, and whether it will eliminate or help create more union jobs over the years, sir?
It will create more union jobs, millions more. Now, I understand that the legislation that I've introduced, which is the most far-reaching climate change legislation, not legislation, but a proposal ever introduced, is controversial. It's controversial because it costs a whole lot of money. But let me be very, very honest with you. We have a president of the United States who is not only a pathological liar, who is not only a fraud and a racist and a sexist and a homophobe and a xenophobe, but he is also a president, and this is really, really dangerous, who is turning his back on science. Thank you. All right. Let me just say this, okay? We got a president who thinks that climate change is a hoax, and he has turned his back on what the scientists are telling us. And let me tell you, as a father of 4 and a grandfather of 7, what the scientists are telling us. What they are telling us is not just that climate change is real, not just that it is caused by human activity, not just that it is doing devastating harm. They are telling us that if you have seen what you did in the last couple of weeks in the Bahamas, what you saw in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, what you saw in New Orleans, what you saw in Charleston, what you saw in New Jersey, incredible and extraordinary downpours that cause floods and incredible extreme weather disturbances. You're going to see more of those in years to come, not just only in America, but all over the world. I was in Paradise, California. That was the city that was burned, town that was burned to the ground a few years ago. And I went there. In a small town of 26,000 people, 86 people were dead, 18,000 buildings completely destroyed, $14 billion in repairs necessary to rebuild that community. Now, some of you may agree with me and some of you may not. But I think we have a moral responsibility for our kids and for future generations to do everything we can to make sure that the planet that they inherit is a planet that is healthy and is habitable. And when we do that, this is a moral responsibility. You don't want to, 20 years from now, look your kids or your grandchildren in the eye and they say, "Grandpa, Grandma, didn't you know what the scientists were saying? Why didn't you act?" I don't want anybody to be in that position. Now, to answer your question, what my legislation does, which transforms our energy system into energy efficiency and sustainable energies, creates 20 million good-paying union jobs. My legislation, as perhaps the most pro-worker member of the Congress, I'll not turn my back on workers who may lose their jobs in this transformation. Coal miners, oil rig workers are not my enemy. Climate change is my enemy. And we have put billions of dollars into our proposal to protect those workers. 5 years of income, health care for all of those workers, job training for all of those workers. So we're not going to turn our backs on the workers who are impacted. But let me just say this, brothers and sisters. This is not only an American issue, it's a global issue. We've got to lead the world in transforming our energy system. What the scientists are telling us is we are playing for the future of this planet. This is no small thing. We have got to act decisively, and when we do that, not only do we save the planet, we create 20 million good-paying jobs.
Senator, many of your positions on public policy are well known, and I'd almost call you a militant champion of labor and the working man. I'm sure you wouldn't be offended by that. Just on a personal note, at what point in life was the tipping point for you to become so dedicated to the principles that you have championed for so long? I think people know so much about your positions. Where was it? Growing up in New York City and things like that? I mean, what happened?
I grew up, I should back up and tell you, my father came to this country from Poland at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket. And he never made much money. We lived in a rent-controlled, something that I support, by the way, a concept that I support. We lived my whole life in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, 3.5 rooms. And my mother's dream was always for us to get out of that apartment and own a home of her own. She died young, it never happened. So I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. And I understand what lack of money does to a family, the pressures that it puts people under. Also, when I was a young man, I got out one day and I was doing some summer work, and I was pushing crates of soda onto a truck from a warehouse. And the wages that I made were really good. And I asked somebody, why are they paying so much? He said, you're working in a Teamster shop. All right? When I was a kid, during Christmas time, I worked for the postal, doing temporary work at the post office. Made damn good wages. Thank you, postal workers. So, as I grew up, I understood that workers who are in unions make substantially more than non-union workers. They are treated with respect and dignity because they can sit down at a bargaining table. They got better health care and other benefits. And one of the things that I want to do, and what is in our labor proposal, I believe that at a time when millions of workers want to join unions, my expectation is that in my first term as president, we will double the number of people in unions in the United States of America. Because we're going to make it easier for workers to join unions, not harder. So those are some of the, my background that helped create me and the views that I hold.
Senators, you've watched over the years, not now, but in past years when union membership was declining, the unions were under attack. A lot of people went out and voted in a very conservative fashion, anti-union. They made no bones about doing so. What about the concept of short memories and people forgetting how that vacation is a union term, safety in the workplace, things like that? How did it sadden you, and did it make you more determined than ever to keep faith with the union movement when you were a senator from a key state in the country and things like that? How did you gird yourself against that cynicism or losing faith, sir?
Because I knew who paid for the anti-union movements. I knew the billionaires who understand something. Let me be very frank with you. The trade union movement today is the last line of resistance against the corporate agenda. You're it. And if they destroy the trade union movement, who's going to stand in their way of giving even more tax breaks for billionaires, outsourcing even more jobs, cutting wages, cutting health care benefits? Who's going to stop them? Organized labor right now is the only organized sector of our society that can stand up to the greed and corruption of corporate America. And that is why I believe that if we're going to grow the middle class in this country, it is absolutely imperative that we grow the trade union movement.
Can you name for us, or have you identified any corporations you consider good for the American public and humane and fair, sir?
Well, I'm sure they're awesome. I just can't think of them right now. But I want to give you an example of something. And I mean that sincerely. I'm sure there are corporations who understand that their future rests with a workforce that is well paid and respected. I know that there are out there. But I want to give you an example, just one example. You may have heard this or you may not. Just today I learned as I was coming here. You all know that UAW is now on strike against General Motors. What you may not have heard, or what I just heard, is GM actually cut the health care benefits, did away with the health care benefits for the GM workers in the UAW. Now that's the kind of ugliness and greed that we are seeing every day. And what we are seeing is corporations that are making good profits shutting down in America to move to cheap labor abroad. You're seeing corporations paying their CEOs 300 times what their workers make. You're seeing employers forcing workers to take cuts in health care and other benefits. Now, one of the points that I have made repeatedly and repeat to you is if elected president, we will demand that corporate America become good corporate citizens. And the way we do that is not by begging them, not by appealing to their sense of morality. We do that by saying that if you are a corporation that is going to outsource your jobs, if you are a corporation that is going to cut back on the health care benefits of your workers, if you are trying to prevent workers from joining unions, you know what? If you think you're going to get a lucrative federal contract, you got another guess coming. In other words, we can use the power of the federal government to say to corporations, do the right thing. Treat your employees with respect and dignity, and you get good federal contracts. Treat your employees with contempt and disrespect, you're going to get to the very back of that line.
We have time for a couple of audience questions for Senator Sanders, and I know there's some folks out there ready to go. Yes, sir. Your name and your union affiliation, please.
Hi, brothers and sisters. My name is Samai Kalon, popularly known as Protocol. I'm a committee member of a union known as Local 274 Unite Here. Unite Here, Local 274. At airports across the country, workers are laboring in difficult conditions, preparing food and drink for carriers like American Airlines. Many of these workers are unable to afford the company insurance with special reference to health insurance. Because of the high deductibles that cost hundreds of dollars every month. Here in Philly, workers are petitioning the National Mediation Board to grant their request to go on strike to fight to change these conditions. As president, I say president because once you believe in the principle of optimism, you are already president, buddy. As president, will you urge the National Mediation Board to answer the request by American airline workers so that they can improve conditions for the workers and their families? That is my question. Yes. Thank you.
Well, the answer is, of course, yes. We have already stood with the American Airlines workers. Some of these people, you know, when you get a ticket, they're standing at the gate there. These people are making $12, $13 an hour. And it's a tough job because people get upset at them for things not their own fault. But the other thing, so yes, we will. But the other thing that we will do is create a situation where all workers in America, all people in America have health care as a human right. Right now, we spend twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. And yet 87 million are uninsured or underinsured. 30,000 people die every year because they don't get to a doctor on time. And 500,000 people go bankrupt every year because of medical bills. That is unacceptable. That is un-American. And we are going to change that. We're going to have a healthcare system that guarantees healthcare to all, not one in which last year the healthcare industry made $100 billion in profit, not one in which the drug companies are ripping us off every day and charging us by far the highest prices in the world for the medicine they need. We're going to take on the drug companies, we're going to take on the insurance companies, and we're going to do what every other major country on earth does. I don't know how many of you know that in Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, if you have a heart transplant, you have major surgery. Anybody here know what the bill is when you get out of that hospital? Zero. They don't go bankrupt. They go to any doctor they want, any hospital they want. That's called a humane healthcare system. And that's what I will fight for and implement here in the United States of America.
Take one more question in a moment. Senator, some people will argue that a reduction in corporate benefits and corporate wealth or incentives to work hard to develop new medicines and new techniques for curing will hurt the effort, and science won't advance as fast as it could without that profit incentive. So how do you respond to that?
How many hours do you have? All right, let me be as clear as I can be. The pharmaceutical industry is not only incredibly greedy, they are not only corrupt, they are engaging in price fixing every single day. All right? Some of you may know that last month I took a trip from Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario with a number of people from the Midwest who are dealing with diabetes. And we went to Canada in order to purchase insulin, which is what diabetics desperately need. Anyone here know the difference in price for the same exact insulin product in Canada as opposed to the United States? Anyone know? 10 to 1. They pay 1/10 of the price. And it's not just insulin, it is almost every other major drug that we need. Last year, at a time when 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors write. You go into the doctor, you're sick, writes out a prescription. 1 out of 5 Americans can't afford to fill it. During that year, the drug companies made $69 billion in profit. Right now, tomorrow, you walk into your pharmacy with a prescription, pharmacists can tell you we've doubled or tripled the price because the drug companies can do that. There is no stopping them. And you know why there's no stopping them? Over the last 20 years, the drug companies have spent $4 billion on lobbying and campaign contributions. It is not the Congress that regulates the pharmaceutical industry. It is the pharmaceutical industry that regulates the Congress. That is an outrage. People are dying. And I don't have to mention to you the opioid epidemic that we're seeing right now. And the case that states attorneys general are now waging. You had an industry that knowingly sold an addictive product in huge numbers all over this country, hiring people to sell more and more of that product when they knew that product was addictive. And every day, all over this country, people are dying because of that addiction. That's what they did knowingly. And that's why they're going to pay billions of dollars in fines. But given the corrupt criminal justice system that we have, mark my words, kids who sell marijuana will end up in jail, but these crooks who have killed hundreds of people will never see a criminal charge. So let me conclude before you throw me off here. Let me.
No, Senator, we have another audience question ready.
No, okay. Let me just say this. If we are going to take on the greed of Wall Street, the drug companies, of the insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry, the prison industrial complex. If we're going to take these people on, no president alone. See, I'm the only person here telling you I can't do it alone. That's right. And the reason we need, it's what the trade union movement has always learned. One person has no strength. One person can only go begging to an employer. But when you stand together, then we have some power. And what this campaign is about and what my presidency will be about are bringing millions of workers together who are sick and tired of the corruption in Washington, politicians bought and sold, tired of the greed and corruption of the corporate elite who are making phenomenal profits while the middle class continues to struggle. That is what this campaign is about.
The gentleman in blue who's been patiently waiting there.
Hello, Senator. My name's Mike Gillespie from IBW Local 98. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Usually I'm working with my hands and not with my mouth. The Department of Labor has recently introduced draft language for regulations on expanding apprenticeships, including expanding industry-recognized apprenticeship programs, or IRAPs. This would give any private entity reign to create watered-down, random standards and certified substandard apprenticeship programs without any oversight into the construction industry, where safety standards mean the difference between life and death. What is your view on the IRAPs as part of the construction industry, and do you support expanding regulation to include newly identified and vaguely defined program accreditation?
Well, I am not shocked that this is something the Trump administration would propose. But let me thank the IBEW, the carpenters, and all the other unions for doing an extraordinary job in your apprenticeship programs. I've had the honor of visiting a number of apprenticeship programs all over this country. And what we want to see, some kids want to go to college, that's great. Some people do not want to go to college. They're good with their hands. And what we need to do is to make sure that we train, have the capability, the infrastructure, to train all of those young people who want to go out and get a good paying job that's out there. And the unions are in the middle of that. You're doing extraordinary work. And let me just say that I look forward to working with the trade union movement to expand those apprenticeship programs, which are so important for the young people of this country.
Thank you. Senator, I think we have a few moments left. If you will make your closing remarks, we'd appreciate it, sir. And thank you for being so available and answering all these questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Look, this campaign is not just about beating Donald Trump. This campaign is about creating the kind of America that I think we all want. When you have a handful of billionaires making hundreds of millions of dollars of campaign contributions and buying politicians, when you have 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of the country, when you got 500,000 people tonight sleeping out on the streets of America, when you got 87 million Americans uninsured or underinsured, when you have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and when you have teachers, great teachers, forced to leave the profession because they're not earning a living wage. When you got all of that and more, what we are dealing with in this country is oligarchy. Oligarchy. A nation moving in the direction of a handful of billionaires controlling the economic and political life of this country. That, to my view, is not what America is supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about a government and an economy that works for all of us. I urge you, please take a look at the campaign programs that we have brought forth, whether it is education, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is housing, whether it is criminal justice, immigration reform. What I intend to do with your help as President of the United States is finally tell the billionaire class and the corporate elite that this America belongs to all of us, not just to them. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.